to remind ourselves why we are here and what our responsibilities are and where to go and where to go anytime we need to get grounded up spiritually and so on. And all our prayers are for Thanksgiving. So Creator, we come before you in a humble way. We thank you for this day. We give thanks for the four directions and the four winds. We give thanks for allowing us one more day to walk upon our mother, the earth. Creator, we give greetings to Mother Earth. We ask her to continue to sustain us in all other life. We tell her one day our bodies will return to her. Creator, we thank you and give greetings to Grandfather Sky. We give thanks for the warmth Father Sun brings as he travels from the east down to the west. We give thanks for the light that allows us to see the great beauty of Mother Earth. Creator, we give thanks and ask you to watch over our relatives, the four-legged. We give thanks for all that is for all they have taught us and our ancestors. We give thanks for what they have given us. Creator, we thank you for the birds, the winged ones. We give thanks for their beauty and songs that fill the air. We honor the trees and the healing plants and herbs that hold so much knowledge of life and are our guardians. We give thanks for what they have taught us, and still today they continue to teach. Creator, for the water, the giver of life, we give great thanks indeed. We give thanks for that is on, above, below, and upon our mother, the earth. Now the Creator, our most humble prayer is for the two-legged, the human beings. They are out of balance and need to return to the old ways to find love, harmony, peace, and spiritual awakening. We ask you, Creator, to reach down and touch our hearts so that we can all live a good life before this pathway of life is no more. Creator, accept our love. Continue to walk with us upon this pathway and help us in our work. For this work of every human being to help, to love each other. So we give great thanks indeed. And I believe that if we all come together and really exercise our inherent responsibilities that each and every one of us have been given, I think it will be possible to have a healthy biodiversity and a healthy human beings on the same planet. And I believe if we continue to do our part, I believe it also will be possible to have free markets, scientific and technological advancement, and even a more positive environmental outcomes. This, I believe, hopefully will kind of set the stage We know what the problems are. We now have to get together and start crafting some of the solutions that will certainly help our Mother Earth to begin the healing journey that she sorely needs. Because I don't think we need any more science to tell us that we have exhausted the carrying capacity of the system. We don't need any more science to tell us we have exhausted the cleansing capacity of the system. And that we, the Aboriginal people, have been saying for a while, unless something is done soon, we'll come to a point of no return. And I believe we're at this point now. So I believe we all have to take this as a sense of urgency. We no longer can afford to be in denial, to be in silence, but rather use the gifts that have been given to us and apply those gifts for the benefit of all. Thank you.
Thank you, Elder Albert Marshall. We open and close in ceremony to honor our gathering and the collective, the creator, the land, all our relations from which all knowledge comes, and to acknowledge that we are just the conduits. Research is ceremony. And as Elder Albert has shared with us, that both our natural science and our Indigenous ways of knowing tell us that we're at a crisis point of biodiversity conservation. So the time is now. Real key to making progress and dealing with the crisis is working together and learning from each other and bringing together the best of Western science and the best of Indigenous ways of knowing and thinking. So that's kind of the premise behind our work. So I'm going to start with a little kind of 5-minute introduction about how Western science and colonialism has impacted or influenced us as peoples, and also nature and conservation and science itself. And then we'll go back to Elder Albert to talk about ways of indigenizing and working together towards living as if we really are part of nature as our fully human best. And then Lisa will tell us about some ways of doing that on the land in practical ways, I think, through things like Indigenous protected and conserved areas, or maybe Indigenous Guardian program. We'll see how much time we have left. Then after that, we want to, instead of having questions from you, to do a quick talking circle where each person will ask to share a short reflection. So we'll go around the room in kind of a talking circle, so to speak, passing the talking stick. And, you know, if there's quite a few of us left, then we'll have to be a little brief. But on the other hand, if the talking stick comes to you and you have nothing that you wish to share, it's perfectly fine to pass that along to the next person. It's just the opportunity to reflect. So we invite you to reflect while we're speaking, so that when it comes to you, you have an opportunity to share. So talking for 5 minutes about the influence of Western perspectives and colonialism on people and nature is quite a task. And I admired Soren's presentation last week, where he gave a pretty good presentation of those kind of influences and biodiversity conservation, and really covered major amount of history and concepts very concisely and understandably in a short time. So a tough act to follow there. But, you know, both the influences of Western worldviews and Western science and colonialism permeate our society. And, we're so familiar with it and take it so much for granted that we don't even really notice that it's there. We don't know what the difference would be if we weren't immersed in that kind of a worldview or social system. So my apologies if I say things that you've already heard, but just to bring everyone around to a common denominator, I'm going to give as brief as I can kind of whirlwind tour. So we call our worldview a Western worldview because it derives mostly from Western European influences as opposed to Eastern ones like India and Asia, where there were significantly different historical and cultural influences. And the things that people commonly refer to as the roots of our Western worldview or tradition are things like the Greek philosophic tradition, folks like Aristotle and Socrates and Plato, Judeo-Christian religion, and sort of Cartesian science. So I'll just talk a little bit about each of those. So the Greek philosophic tradition really drove home this idea that the highest value is reason. So, the saying like, I think, therefore I am, so that's what defines whether you exist or not, is whether you can think, that kind of idea. So that would that's one of the first important things. And men were considered to be the pinnacle of reason. So, there was men in this hierarchy, and then women and animals were considered irrational, emotional, and not as high on the pinnacle as men. So it starts to set up that hierarchy. And by thinking and using our thinking and our talents, that way we can civilize nature and therefore make it better than raw nature. So these are some of the ideas that still permeate a little bit today that came from the Greek philosophical tradition. With Judeo-Christian religion, we got another big influence on our place of humans in nature. So humans were considered to have a soul. And so humans were higher in the chain of being, closer to God at the top of the hierarchy. And nature is at the bottom, considered not to have a soul. And humans were kind of given or said to have dominion over all the beasts of the sea and the air. So that sets up this idea of humans being separate and everything else being for our use and purposes. That's quite a shift from some of the earlier teachings that showed that our role as humans were to care for nature as God cares for us. But kind of with the rise of Cartesian science and industrial systems, it's shifted to this dominion over kind of idea. So with the rise of the Cartesian revolution, René Descartes and others put forward this idea that knowledge can be derived through a scientific method or a deductive reasoning, and didn't have to be just taken on faith alone or handed down through the generations, that there were ways to figure things out. And part of that set up this idea that there are people and things that have this mind or mental reality. So there was this mental reality, but there's also physical existence. So suddenly they set up this dualism between separate mental and physical reality. So that further separates humans from nature, mind from body, and sets up these polar opposites. At the same time, it's not just that these things are different, like men and women, never the twain shall meet in this conception, but that one is considered higher or better than the other. So culture and humans were considered better or higher than nature and non-humans. And with René Descartes, there's this, Sir Isaac Newton, there's the idea that most things can be reduced or broken down to its component parts. So the world is then seen like a clock with all these different cogs and wheels. So nature is seen as this mechanical system of cogs and wheels and components. And the laws of physics can explain it all. So it's things like gravity and the like that keep these things moving. So added to that was the idea of evolution, or Charles Darwin and his others came along saying that things have evolved. They just didn't show up here as a matter of faith as described in religion, that there was this evolution that took place, and to higher and higher states, and humans and civilization are considered the pinnacle of that, and that it's a linear progression and towards progress. So that embedded this idea of progress, linear, endless progress towards higher states. And that became an economic imperative then. So, that's a very simplified version. And of course, there are always alternatives to all those, but those are some underlying things that are very different from Indigenous worldviews, but very ingrained in our governance systems, our economic systems, our knowledge systems in the Western tradition. So these kind of ideas also allowed for the idea of colonization, because if you look around and see all this raw nature and uncivilized kind of places, then it's open for improvement and progress, and who better to do it than the superior beings. So the British colonizers, for example, were able to see North America as devoid of civilization and sort of empty in a way, because they couldn't see the evidence of the indigenous governance systems and ways of seeing and knowledge, because it was so different than what they valued and how they perceived that to be. So by having these kind of beliefs, they were able to justify colonization, slavery, and other wrongs. And the legacy of these kind of belief systems continued to this day. They have continued to influence our views of Indigenous people, and they've continued to influence our views of nature and of non-human nature. So to look at those things are part of our truth and our history. And so it's important to examine those, because those are the things that have helped lead us to where we are today. As we moved into North America as settlers, colonial settlers, the Indigenous people welcomed us to the land and shared the land and their knowledge of how to live within it with us. And then later in the 1750s and 60s, we had treaties of peace and friendship that were signed between the British Crown and the Indigenous people. And within those, the agreement was made that the Mi'kmaq would continue to live as they always had, hunting and traveling and living and trading on the land. And we would all share the land together. The Mi'kmaq did not cede their land to the British Crown, and they did not lose it in a war or a takeover or anything. We just all agreed to live together in peace and friendship. So these treaties have been upheld and enshrined in the Constitution Acts, the British North American Act, later the Charter Rights and Freedoms, and are upheld by the courts. Yet despite these kind of commitments, Canadians, as individuals and governance systems, have continued to dispossess Indigenous lands of their lands and lifeways. And as a consequence, many have lost their languages and customs and other core aspects of their culture. And despite these injustices, Indigenous peoples have demonstrated tremendous resilience, and many are resurging and reclaiming their languages, worldviews, and ways of knowing. And here's an opportunity for us to work together and for to learn from them. It is important to understand this history, and it's important to acknowledge what we've lost because of it. For one, we've lost incredible insights from the people who were indigenous to these lands and whose languages are of the lands. We have lost the holistic ways of viewing the world and our place in it because of our Western worldviews, and how now there's an opportunity to try and gain some of that back. So sometimes people think that these acts of injustices were all in the past, but they continue on to today, and they are still being documented, such as through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada and the National Inquiry into the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Children. So if you want to know more about the history in Canada, those are two excellent documents to go to. So as a result of our Western worldviews and colonialism, there's been a tremendous decimation of nature and dramatic declines in species and ecosystems because we see them as resources for our use rather than something to be honored and for us to live with in reciprocal relationships. So Western science and conservation both reflect the separation between humans and nature. Both of them are kind of fragmented and siloed. You know, we have, just as we have each scientific discipline being seen as a separate discipline, and government departments all being separate from each other, conservation is also seen as separate. Conservation and protected areas have been marginalized from the rest of society, and they have been set aside as places that are separate from human activities and sustenance. They are places for people to visit. Often Indigenous peoples who have sustainably stewarded the land for thousands of years have been forcibly removed from their lands in order to enable its so-called protection. And then it becomes more like a recreational park. So these are kind of examples of how traditional conservation has just furthered this dichotomy or dualism between people and nature and hasn't really taken a holistic perspective. So with all these views has come the idea that we need to protect nature from humans. And this shows that, you know, there's this, on the one hand, we have these no-touch protected areas that are set up with like, we need to protect nature here and people should keep out or tread only very lightly. On the other hand, there are these tremendously damaging human activities taking place everywhere else. So that's that dualism and dichotomy again. Instead, what we need to look for are ways that can recognize that humans are part of nature too, and ways for humans to behave as if we realize that we are part of nature instead of behaving as if we don't need it, as if we can somehow survive even by damaging it. So this is where we can start to learn from our Indigenous colleagues and friends who have been living with and sustainably with the land for millennia. And so this is where I pass it over to Albert to help guide us in the kinds of things. So how can we behave differently? How can we envision these broad transformative changes to see humans as part of nature? We really need to believe that we are part of nature. And when we do so, we will know that we need to care for it, to live together in ways that heal people and nature and our relationship to each other. So I'll pass it on to you now, Albert.
Thank you very much. And that is a big order, because obviously what has been said for a long time of how we have compromised the integrity of our environment. But for some reason, people still remain to be in denial and be silent. The question is, why? And how? What has to happen before these people could really get them to start reflecting and really look back and really clearly see just where we came from and how much destruction we have caused to the very source of life in which we all depend upon. I believe it boggles everyone's mind. As much as intelligence we have, and we have so many intelligent people, but yet those intelligent people are still willing to destroy the very home that we are living. with all these many intelligent people, they can't seem to grasp these concepts: interconnectivity, interdependency, in which once you compromise an area ecologically, what would it take for people to think that will somehow affect me, no matter where I am in this part of the world? And what more can we say to remind people that this climate change, global warming, or loss of biodiversity, it's not a regional issue. It is not a national issue, but rather a global issue. But yet, I believe there are no efforts even attempted to mobilize all these little pockets of energy that are doing everything they can within their power to encourage people to begin to exercise their inherent responsibility of making sure that no action will ever be taken that will compromise the integrity of the area. That we will use this education that we have of ensuring that as how we move forward together, that every action that we will take will be in harmony with our Mother Earth, with our Earth. But I believe most of us are very mindful of those. But yet, no one is trying to come up with some kind of an action plan. And I believe, how do we get people to understand and to grasp some of these things? That this wonderful knowledge that comes from science has used only to be the arm of destruction. And there's no question in anyone's mind the ability of that energy or that knowledge. Why can't we, again, come together collectively and try to formulate some kind of an action in which this very science, in this very knowledge that has been used as an arm of destruction, and now to transform it to be the harm of healing and mitigation. Because I believe there are enough contaminated sites, water, and so on, especially here in Nova Scotia. We have so many millions and millions of contaminated water sitting in the holding ponds. And I don't know what the rationale there is, but if this science is so wonderful that it can take us to the moon, why can't we transform that science to help us clean up some of those contaminated waters and sites? If we are concerned with socioeconomics, I'm sure in return, as we are moving forward in this mitigation and cleaning up, I believe it can produce just as much, if not more, economic opportunities. But yet, for reasons no one knows, we are still allowing the laws of nature, the laws of man, to supersede the laws of nature. What more can we say to remind people that nature has rights, humans have responsibilities? What more can we say that the devastation that is before us could no longer be addressed by a few, but rather from a collective level? We have to continuously ask, why are so many people are prepared to be silent and in denial? What more can we say and do that if we can all work together, I believe some of these things can come about without at any point compromising anyone's economic opportunities. Yet we talk about civilizations, and we just celebrate them every so often. I know our non-native brothers are very proud to say that this civilization began at the East. For us, we have a different image of that. This is where the devastations began. That, as someone has reminded us earlier. And I believe this is a question that needs a more heartfelt answer. How can a group of people for thousands and thousands and thousands of years coexist with this very complex system without at any point in time they have actually compromised the ecological integrity of the area? But yet, each and every time when an Aboriginal people stand up and try to protect Mother Nature, the law then is extended to the fullest extent of it, to silence them and to remove them. Yet, there are a lot of other people talking about conservation, saving the environment, but yet they will not be willing to support someone that is so committed that they are actually even willing to compromise their civil liberties and whatever. Why are we allowing these people to stand alone? When are we going to come together as one and say, we have reached a point of no return, and unless something is done soon, something might drastic, beyond our control, will happen? Why can't people really ponder some of those points that the elders have been, that the Aborigines have been raising for years? If the way in which we treat our natural world is not changed, we will then witness the fourth mass of destruction of humans, of eradicating humans from this planet. Because it should become obvious to everyone that we are not the superior being. As a matter of fact, I don't believe nature needs us, as we could only go back 50,000 years or more since we sort of emerged. But more so within the last couple of hundred years. It only has taken less than 200 years or more to bring us into this state of hopelessness, because we have allowed others, for whatever reason they had, to continue this rate of destruction, in which today we are so dependent on someone else for our next meal. Here we are in an area where we had everything that we needed, and that is what is called in English the Bondrup Lakes. But today that lake is practically barren to land use activities and so on. So we too are much more dependent than others, because that's the only way of life we knew how to live off the land at any point, not compromise the integrity of the area, in which we were allowed to practice some of the concepts that have been brought forth to us. Concepts or words like nedukulim. Nedukulim, yes, it gives you a privilege to use the gifts from Mother Earth, but it also constantly and consistently reminds you that you have no right to compromise the ecological integrity of the area, and that you are responsible of ensuring that your actions while you are here will also not compromise the future generations of their abilities to sustain themselves or to enjoy nature and to learn from nature. So I believe there is no more time left for us to keep rattling on what the problems are. We know what the problems are. The question is, when are we going to get enough nerve to come together and dream and imagine and say, we need a new narrative. But narrative this time around has to be done from all of us, because we now have to coexist. And I believe it is possible. And if this new narrative is drafted from holistic perspective, and I believe those arms of destruction will have to be redrafted. For example, some of the legislations and policies that were crafted just to eradicate or to harvest as fast as you can, just for the benefit of few. So I believe if we are serious of what we are thinking and saying, I think we also have to be committed and say, yes, we need some action. And one area that I would like to recommend, of course, is that could anyone explain to me in a logical sense how any living thing could exist without water, without air, and without fertile soil. But yet, of all this intelligence and knowledge we have, no one has ever even suggested, why can't we come up with a new charter in which those very source of life in which we all depend upon will have some protection? And if somehow we are successful in that, then I honestly, truly believe the policymakers and the governments will have no other alternative but to begin to redraft those destructive policies that were created or crafted when our environment was in a pristine condition. So these are a lot of questions, I believe, not only as individuals, for us to ask ourselves, do we really need a no transformative change? Did we really compromise the ecological integrity of the air with no return? Do we really need a no narrative? And hope if the answer is yes, then I believe the next step should be is to come together and to begin craft this new narrative that will not only we be able to move forward and balance our activities so that they will be in harmony with nature, but also be able to use that energy to begin to mitigate some of the harms and damages we have done in the past. Because it's all right to acknowledge and to recognize a problem, but that's only a very small part of it. Someone else also have to take that responsibility of mitigating some of those areas in which created those problems. And if we have something that is so advanced that it can even take us to the moon and back, why can't we use that very knowledge again and really transform it to be the arm of renewal and the arm of mitigation? Thank you.
Thank you, Albert. I always reflect back on the fact sometimes that after all that our communities have been through over these years, that our elders are still so willing to share and be generous with their knowledge. I know a lot of our communities and our elders, that comes from that deep sense of responsibility that Albert speaks to in terms of our place on this earth and in society as Indigenous people, to as caretakers of this land. When they view themselves in that way and the elders speak of that, they include not just the lands, the animals, the fish, the birds, but they include all the people in that as well, including all of yourselves in that perspective of responsibility. And I think that's a beautiful thing that Albert shares. Part of our work in our organization and what we do in terms of what we would probably refer to as resource management, we like to now refer to that as maintaining land relationship, just as a way to distinguish the difference between imposing your kind of values and beliefs and all the things that Karen spoke so eloquently about in terms of where we are in this space, in this relationship to land. So it struck me, there's so many things I could talk about. I know we're probably going a little bit over time, but that's fine. I know Albert's pretty much said all that needed to be said. So one thing that that struck me also in talking to Karen and Albert about this group in particular, I imagined a lot of naturalists and scientists, and the fact that you're with this group and the appreciation you have for nature, the joy the love you get from being out in nature and the way you view it. And wouldn't that be amazing if you saw yourself as part of nature and really understood that you are just as beautiful and amazing and as part of that system as the monarch butterflies you were walking through in that field that day. And that's the teachings and understandings that our elders give us. And the way we are trying to advance conservation and concepts around sustainability and biodiversity in all our work, all take that two-eyed seeing approach that Albert has gifted us with, that understanding that if you could take all those strengths and the knowledge and what science and technology brings, but then be able to apply it and use it through the lens of Indigenous knowledge and understandings of how we are to, how we maintain that relationship with Mother Nature and where we fit in that relationship and our responsibilities and our place through that lens. So that all those Indigenous concepts of sustainability, like Nideglan, are at the forefront and at the center of what we do, right? For Indigenous people, it's very hard to distinguish our culture and our teachings and our values from the way we approach resource management because of the way I explain it to sometimes it's like when you do science and when people are out there researching and technology and learning about things and you're so removed from what you're looking at. You take it from a very objective point of view with that you're not part of that system, you're not part of that equation. And then you use it to inform decisions that aren't based on your understanding of your relationship with that system, but instead through the lens of your values and your cultural beliefs, all of what Karen had said about where that Western perspective is coming from. It's still so far removed from that same idea that comes from the same beliefs that you're not part of that system, right? So when we talk about what two-eyed seeing and what we try to emulate in our teachings in our work from the teachings that elders give us is, can we take that knowledge of Western and science, but also traditional knowledge, the knowledge that we and of nature from being so intimately tied to the land, that is also a knowledge, that is also a science. You can take those both and then make decisions with that knowledge based on those teachings and understandings that Albert has shared. And then I think that's what Albert is talking about in terms of how can we advance, how can we go into the future in a better way? How can we get out of this situation that we find ourselves in terms of concerns around climate change and biodiversity? All those teachings that have lasted all these years that are like lucky for all of us that Indigenous people have not lost, not just Mi'kmaq, but Indigenous people around the world have not lost. It's still there. It's still very relevant. One ways that you can support and learn is to work with communities, Indigenous communities, work with the elders, work with organizations like UINR, like CMM, like others. Indigenous protected conserved areas is one of the things that we are currently working on. And these are areas that are of high biodiversity, are of cultural significance or archaeological significance, or just sacred places, or it could be all of those things, where Indigenous people are going to be the ones to take the lead in managing those areas through those perspectives. So there are areas where we can take all those learnings and those teachings that Albert is sharing and really try to apply them through a solely Indigenous lens. Not that we won't use Western science, not that we're not going to use technology, not that we're not going to use partnerships, but they are intended to give Indigenous people opportunity to reconnect to the land, to revitalize these cultural beliefs and teachings and our traditional governing systems, and try to reconnect and try to find what we I wouldn't want to say lost, but what we were out of touch with, and try to learn how that those teachings and those practices can improve our situation. And we coined this term in our Indigenous groups, beacons of teachings. And we look at our IPCAs as those beacons of teachings, because as Karen had so rightfully said, that we don't want to apply these teachings and knowledge to specific postage stamp parcels of land throughout Canada, because where is that going to get us? These are teachings that we need to apply broadly and through all areas, through resource extraction, through forestry, through mining. If those are the things that have to happen, then they should be done through that lens and understanding that Albert says is like, we need to do better. We can do better, right? There's got to be better ways to improve those things. And if you try to look at those situations and those obstacles that I say, I guess, to really protecting the lands and waters, I guess those approaches, if you take them and look at that through an Indigenous lens, you can see that there's got to be a solution to do those in a better way. What Albert always tells us is to take a light touch, right? To have as minimal impact as possible. Like even with the ideas of forestry, when we look at forestry, we say, well, definitely you could have economic development. You can derive a living off the land, as our people have done for thousands of years, without what Albert always says is taken away from the ecological integrity of that land, right? And its ability to what I'm trying to say is to do it in a sustainable way, right? And I guess that though, I don't want to say too much more than that. I think Albert said enough if you listen carefully, even to an elder's closing prayer and what they're saying and the teachings within that. It's more than that. That just like I say, it's more than just nice sentiments, nice thoughts. There's lessons, there's teachings in there that we have to learn, and we have to learn to apply those and live those teachings if we hope for things to become better, right? And it's all about living with what Albert says too, like it's a sense of gratitude and understanding. And I think for me, it's like, if you learn to have that gratitude for all the living creatures that he usually refers to in his prayers, that to me, and learning about my culture and learning about these teachings, what I take from it at this point in time, because these teachings, they grow and you get a better understanding, a deeper understanding. But at this moment, what I take from it is that sense of gratitude, is that if you learn to not to take these things for granted, then you can look at things and do things in a better way. And yeah, that's about all I have to say. There's so much more. Like, we could probably talk about this for hours and hours about the work that we're doing and how our approaches that we're taking. But I think that's the biggest thing that I feel that is worth people taken away from this is that understanding of place, connection to nature, that we are not, like Albert says, a part of it, apart from it, but we are a part of it. And to learning to live life with a sense of gratitude for those things and to take better care of them in any way we can, right? So.
Thank you, Lisa. So yeah, I think we are kind of out of time or running out of time. Maybe you could just nod, Soren, if that's kind of your take on things too. Because if so, what I was gonna.
We usually run over time a little bit, so I think
Okay.
we can go. Like there's already a few people who have dropped out,
Mhm.
and maybe it's the election results that they're eager to see what's going on.
Right.
But I think we can go for a little bit of time still.
Okay.
And when people really begin to disappear, then we'll end it. It has been recorded, so those people can always go back and see it. So so I think we should continue for another, let's say, 10 minutes.
Yeah, so that's great. And I want to save some time for if Albert would do a closing prayer to end. So maybe what I'd like to suggest is that if people could, maybe there are a few people who would like to give their reflections orally, and then there may be some others who would type them into the chat in a way that we could have their reflections recorded. So if there's someone who would like to speak up, I'm trying to see how many. We're all on the same page here now, so I think we've at least reduced down to that many. So if someone would like to speak, you could either put the little reaction button and raise your hand, or
indeed go ahead and unmute.
Or just go ahead and unmute and reflect.
Maybe I will start then. And I will start with a story. And a few years ago, I took part in a talking circle with Frank Muse down at Bear River. And we were sitting inside a wigwam and passing the, the talking stick. And I talked about a wigwam that I built when I was 15 years old or something like that. And I had, I would often spend the night there, and I would also hunt. So on this particular occasion, I had shot a squirrel and I ate the squirrel. And when I finished with that story, a red squirrel charged into the wigwam we were sitting in and almost came over to me and started to chatter away as if it was scolding me. And then it turned around and ran out. And everybody there were quite blown away by that. But to me, it was a real eye-opener to the effect that when I was younger and had shot that squirrel, I didn't think at all about it. You know, I just shot it and ate it without, you know, thanking it. And it just made me realize, I was just blown away by it, because here was this, I told this story and then the squirrel came in and scolded me and then ran away. And it just made me realize that we are all connected. And that squirrel was bound to tell me that I had done something without ceremony way back then. So that's my story.
Thank you, Soren. Anyone else like to take up the talking stick?
I see Dennis Nash has unmuted. Dennis, did you want to say something?
No, I just joined the meeting and I'm sorry I'm late.
Oh, okay, okay. Anybody else? Lee?
Yeah,
Lewis?
I just wanted to thank you for a moving, thoughtful presentation. I feel chastised but rededicated, which is a good thing to be on the eve of the solstice. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you for your wisdom.
Anybody else? I'll see if there's anything in the chat. I don't see anything in the chat. Don't be shy. I don't see anybody volunteering. So it is a bit of a, oh, Irmgard, I see you have unmuted yourself.
Yes, I have unmuted, but I'm not sure if I should say what I'm thinking. Anyway, I just want to say that apparently our culture started going the wrong way a long time ago, right? I mean, even the Greek philosophers, some went this way and some went that way, but it seems to me that all throughout our human history, we always chose the way that would give us more, us humans, especially in our Western cultures, but not so much only Christianity. Even before that, we would always choose a path that would give us more power over our other humans, and of course over nature. And it was all
You
to get richer. A lot of people at least wanted to get richer with that power and with that power over nature. And so this has gone on for, I would say, even before Christianity. So how on earth are we thinking we can turn this around? Because the majority of people are still thinking that way. And the majority of people, even us who are in, I will say we are in the choir, we are still benefiting. We have the comforts we have because of that. So are we willing to turn that around and give that up? And what are we telling the billions of people who still want to reach a better lifestyle? How I cannot see how this is, how this is happening. I mean, I like to think that way, and I like to follow that idea, but I mean, realistically, it's it's a dream we are having.
Thanks, Irmgard. Anybody else?
No, and I just want to say
Yes.
that I can really appreciate what you're saying, because I mean that comes to mind quite a bit too. And it seems like we're on like a runaway train, and how do we stop it? How do we, it's like turning a large ship, right? You can't just put the brakes on that thing and expect it to turn on a dime, for sure, on this path that we put ourselves on. But I guess at least what we're trying to do as an organization is, like I said, there's always room for improvement in what we do. So even in the ideas around forestry, what we're looking at, and because we don't shy away from economic development in our communities. It's not something that our communities are opposed to at all. We want the same things. We want jobs. We want a future for our communities. But what we ask of our communities and others is to approach things in a different way. So forestry, as an example, even in Nova Scotia, is taken a different direction. That's actually more quite in line with the concepts of Nethergloom. So with the ecological forestry in the forestry matrix from the Leahy report as an example. So is there a way that we can make as much money off a particular parcel of land, because we understand that there has to be revenue to operate and create jobs, but can we do that in a way that uses more high value trees, right? Instead of clear cutting and making things like pulp and stuff like that, is there a way that our communities can go in and get high value trees and do value added products that would still provide economic benefits? Is there a way we can be using non-timber forest products and other things like ecotourism within a forest system that will enable us to still have jobs and still have a livelihood, but maybe approach it in a different way? Can we do mining, for example? Is there better ways to hold that wastewater and to treat that wastewater with like all the technology advances that we're doing in other places? Is there not a way that we can do that to ensure that there's no leakages in those berms? And there's better ways to do things. We're just looking for improvement. All those little things, I guess, add up when you look at renewable energy as an example, right? What can we be doing as people to advance that faster and in a better way, right? That transition. I think the thing is that our elders tell us is that we have a choice to make these changes and to try to do things better, or nature won't give us a choice. And she'll fix things in her own way, right? So that's the way that we look at it. And it's still daunting. It's still, we don't have all the answers. But that doesn't mean we're not going to try.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa. So is there anyone who had a final reflection that you'd like to share before we move on to the Albert's closing prayer remarks?
I can add to this discussion, and Soren, your story kind of reminded me of just something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, and also now is and I think a lot of people my age and youth in general struggle with the enormity of this whole issue of biodiversity and colonialism, and how that still remains embedded today. And so I kind of often go back to that idea of one thing that each individual can do is, as you say, understand their own connection to nature. And then I think about it and I wonder what that actually looks like on the ground. And Soren, your story kind of reminded me of a moment this summer when, after just a really long day of work, we were working in the field, and it was during a heat wave. And we were staying at a little cabin. I was working at Kedgemakujik, and we were staying at a cabin in the park. And we came back, and I was just exhausted and kind of tired, in a bad mood, and ready to go to bed. And we came back, and there was a beaver in the water, kind of across the lake, slapping its tail. And it was just silent. There was no one around. And it was just a really incredible moment. We got out the binoculars, and everyone was suddenly excited about what was happening, and just immediately in a better place. And that was kind of a moment to realize where I was and what was happening and how much I have to be grateful for. And just that story and that moment I had this summer reminded me that those are, I guess, the moments to realize where I am in the space around me, and be grateful for that, and to understand my role in it. And I appreciate this conversation for helping my brain get through that.
Thanks, Riley. Karen, do you want to, you're in charge, so I won't say anything.
Okay, Albert, would you be open to closing us?
Sure, thank you. Kuchino wakakijino. Amishkara meri wi wala aliye. Badi jiglo kenago kispu kisigana muye. Ahmeri wi wala aliye fitanteli asdiel me nimidni na badi jiglo indep. Wala aliye meri wi chilante se ulodi. Kaji godi wanta godi kisigana muye. Wala aliye meri wi chitantel mawaliye wala. Tan mawagno dumaye. Tan kistel mawu ya bokon maru tidesne. Tan kistel mawu lugudi desne. Tan kistel mawu wewtesne ta koy kisigina muye. Tan tildet pakot desne. Tan tiltes fedet desne. Ramau sit khamu goy. Ramanigan to watam na me weski gino wokida. Asmanega wokidi ula besukida. Kisi azukida. Kisne mi rata teji gulo khasit khamu. Akhir kisigina masukida. Ahne mo kada era molega bokona munen melwi. Tan kisi bokona mone not koti. Kisi awadno. Tan koy naktama ta koy naktamuch. Ramana peng mo kisi wewta. Tan kistel wol mi majun, kistel wol mi majun sokida. Eskamla eme go de meeting, a howlo de meeting, profit khamu. Laneng mo at least pukta das. And I think we have so much to be thankful for. We thank the Creator for giving us this beautiful day and all the wonderful gifts that we have of being well and given the knowledge to be able to coexist. And most importantly, I believe we need to expand our efforts. How do we continuously involve our young people? Because I think this is something that is affecting the Aboriginal people more, because it is part and parcel of our inherent responsibility of not just passing on our experiences, our knowledges to them, but also to help them prepare, not only to carry on of who they are as Aboriginal people, but also acquire the skills that they will need so that the work can be much more effective and much more technological, if you may. Because I believe very little is done at this juncture of connecting the youth with the elders, because the elders shall have all the triggers that they will need, all the lessons learned from the past in which these young people can use as to how they forge forward with those lessons learned, to help them, guide them, not to go into the same direction or the same way as what cost us to the demises in which we are experiencing. We also want to thank the Creator for giving us this beautiful, beautiful night or evening. And we ask the Creator to give us the energy, love, and compassion so that we can do the work that is yet ahead of us. And most importantly, be mindful how much we depend upon her, and also to remind ourselves daily what our inherent responsibilities are. The destruction that we see before us was pretty much done incrementally. Therefore, I believe no one should get discouraged of the complexity of this problem. But I think we too have to take those little steps individually and eventually collectively in the begin to set our lives in a different course, a course in which it will be not only ecologically sustainable. And if we go into that area, I am more than sure our Mother Earth will be pleased and will respond with all this gratitude that we are expressing